Why do they make kick-ass products? And I think that's why we have this 2.0, when the relationship with Brazil was initially buying raw materials, but now, it's more broad-based. And for internet, for online, it's not about one company, but generally for Chinese online companies, I believe the reason there are so many strong companies is because China is very unique in the world that almost the entire society is mobile native. So what I mean by that, so China, they didn't have, mobile internet was truly revolutionary in China, unlike any other country. Before, Chinese people didn't have PCs at home, and they didn't have daily internet access. And this was not just at home, but many companies didn't have PCs. China was poor at the end of the day. But when mobile internet happened, it worked differently in China. Why? Because China at the time, very luckily, built the manufacturing supply chain. Chinese manufacturers had just reached the level to have a manufacturing know-how to build a smartphone. And Chinese people, not just wealthy people, but mass Chinese population, just reached the income level enough to afford locally built smartphones. And this is very different from developed countries, because in developed countries, mobile internet was more like an extension of a broadband internet. So it wasn't that revolutionary. For countries that were poorer than China, it hit only the wealthy people because majority of the population couldn't afford not just iPhone, but China-made phones. So the adoption was gradual. But in China, because of the confluence of many factors, the smartphone adoption rate went from 15% in 2010 to 60% in 2012 in just 2 years. And because of that mass adoption of mobile technology and suddenly having a computer in everyone's pocket and being online every day, it's very unique. Like the entire society is like that. Like China, the offline payment didn't work. It was WeChat Pay that made offline payment work. There was no national retail in China. It was Taobao that made it possible. So when you have such billions of people and the society having grown up in mobile internet, of course, people's demand is much higher. In a sense, you can say China as a society is far ahead in experience curve, mobile internet experience curve than others. And because they are so advanced, it's much, their product and design and it's much easier to build a competitive product. I think that's the secret for mobile internet. And then for manufacturing, it has been well known that China is competitive in manufacturing, but why suddenly with, this cutting edge products like drones, solar panels, like batteries, EVs? If you think about it, I think it's on top of that supply chain and disciplined workforce, it is education. China does really good public education for their population, and it generates 12 million college graduates every year. And almost 40% of that 12 million comes out with degree in engineering. And the society has a culture of respecting and paying their engineers very well. I think all these is why we see Chinese companies being very competitive. However, again, as an equity investor, publicly listed equity investor, the question is not about whether they can export and grow revenue, but they can grow profit. And that becomes tricky because operating overseas is tricky. Simple export is easy, but companies do not like it. They want, Chinese companies to come and create jobs. European companies have operated overseas for 100 years. It took decades for Koreans and Japanese to learn how to operate overseas. And, Chinese companies are just starting. So